Hello and welcome to episode 4 of Awdry Corner. This week we are joined again by Luke.
Hiya.
By Stuart.
You're right.
And our special guest this week is Mike.
Hello.
How are you, Mike?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
So what are you up to at the moment?
Well, I'm just busy sorting out some stuff for my project Branch Engines, readaptation of one of the books, and I'm just busy making up all the buildings and props for it. So it's a long task, but it gives me something to do.
Especially in these times, there's not a lot else we can do, is there? So,
No.
So as most of our viewers will remember from last week, we were discussing our favourite stories and we decided to break this into a two-parter. So Mike is going to start us off this week with one of his favourite, well, it's your favourite sort of book, isn't it? But you're going to focus on some of the stories that you like in that book.
Yes. So to start off is, of course, Branch Engines, because it's a book I actually, when I started off modelling the Far Cry Branch Line, it was one book I tend to actually look at it more. Not really for research as to how to build the layout out there, but I just kind of love the stories out there. And that was something that took me back to my childhood, because Thomas Comes to Breakfast was probably one of my favorite stories in Thomas altogether, because, well, for one thing, it was, growing up I only had 2 Thomas VHS tapes, and Thomas Comes to Breakfast was on one of them, but it was the only one I've seen where we have Thomas have a serious accident. And I just kind of find that pretty interesting, where we have the main character where he's never, from seeing those 2 videos, he's never had like a proper serious accident. But then this episode comes along, and my goodness, he has one heck of a crash. Like, he pretty much destroys somebody's front part of their house, and not to mention ruining a very perfectly good breakfast. But
Property damage, that is.
Hey,
property damage.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So I just kind of found that story quite interesting, very, very good. But then also reading the rest of the book as well, learning about how the time frame of Thomas being away and what issues happens on the branch line with Daisy's introduction, just shows how sometimes replacements come along, and sometimes it's the thing about not getting along with newcomers and how difficult they are to fit in, and trying to make them see sense as to what any wrongdoings that they're doing, like Daisy refusing to pull the milk fan, or not knowing what to do when being confronted with bulls and so forth. But then when it comes to Percy's predicament, there we kind of see Daisy's kind of she kind of learns her lesson and realizes if they need to work on this line together, they need to work as a team. And after Percy's crash, it's mentioned that she helps clear away trucks and so forth to help Toby. And even though she does get slightly told off by the fucking chore, she does promise that she will learn from her mistakes out there. And despite showing the odd occasion of her being a little cheeky every now and again, a little bit fussy in parts, she's still a good character to work on, to have in the book, in the story. And yeah, I just kind of like that kind of story plot really throughout the whole book.
It is a nice kind of look at the branch, without Thomas, which is something don't think you've ever actually seen in the books prior to it.
Yeah, because it's Thomas's branch line, but without Thomas, and it's how can the railway run without it? You're missing the vital ingredient to the Far Cry branch line by removing one of its most important passenger stock.
Isn't that also the beauty of the story in a way? It takes Thomas down a peg or two. That he's been an idiot. Although I always think you argue this, poor Thomas gets blamed for something that actually isn't his fault. It's the cleaner.
That is something. Yeah, that's also something I found pretty weird. How come the cleaner didn't get blamed? Because it was his.
I feel he did, but I feel like Topham's is more about Thomas's attitude towards it all.
Yeah, because at the very start of the book, he's been constantly boasting that
cocky.
Yeah, he's very cocky like that. Because there's one thing I kind of notice about in terms of the Railway series books is that when we see Thomas, we seem to see him go through like a different stages of what I would describe as the stages of life. So like we have like our childhood years, our youngster stuff, then we go through our teenage years, and then we go into adult years. In Branchline Angels, I have a feeling Thomas is going into his teen years.
Absolutely.
He's going very boastful, very cocky. He knows everything there, and he sometimes has a wee bit of attitude here and there. But then when we see him come back, like sometime after his age, we start to see him. He learns from his mistakes, and he knows, like, I have to focus more on what I'm doing. And then we see him become more mature. He's more of an adult.
But he does become very, very grumpy.
Yes, as
a result,
tramway engines. He's just like.
We'll get to that when Stuart's got a lovely little presentation in the lineup.
I would crack my knuckles, but I can't.
I'll do it for you.
Oh,
horrible!
Yeah,
that was the last. That is the last time Luke will be on Awdry Corner. No, I'm joking. I'm joking.
But one thing also kind of I just want to also point out is when I read up about when I was reading the book Reading Between the Lines, that Christopher Awdry gave me a copy of in 2008, he wrote down that the story was written due to the error mistake of Thomas having a lower front on his diet and having a straight buffer beam at the back, probably maybe due to like maybe a artist error of some sort, but. I just read the reason why Thomas had to be had to have his new straight buffer beam was to like with Henry and the Flying Kipper, you might as well get them involved in some sort of a serious accident that results in that part getting damaged.
Yeah, I think a lot of the thing with that is I think after the people and the children were writing in like, why has Henry now got those buffers? Why has he got that chimney?
Yeah,
he's probably in the mindset of like, well, then they want to see it happen rather than it happen outside of the books.
Yeah,
I mean, we all want to see buffers. That's just a fact.
Yeah, but I think in Thomas's case, like I think this is probably maybe something that he's been often that Reverend Awdry questions himself really, and I don't think really writers would maybe write in to talk about that there of Thomas's lower front buffer beam. So I think that was just kind of like his way to saying, like, I don't know, maybe it was probably a case of maybe OCD or something. He's like, nope, I have to fix
He was definitely very kind of perfectionist when it came to getting stuff like that correct.
Yeah,
because I feel like from like his railway like enthusiast / railwayman background type, he was very like, that can't be right because those buffers are too high up from the front one. They won't match the stock. This needs to be lowered.
Yeah,
you actually it's and because I reread the Thomas Tank Engine Man autobiography, it's very much in there from day one. He talks about how the illustrations need to be accurate. They need to be accurate, and I know it makes it very clear he wasn't impressed with the William Middleton illustrations, and of course the original Reginald Payne ones. People often don't realise that Dolby went back and actually did a massive amount of editing to those. And if you do a comparison side by side, there's quite a big change in a lot of Thomas's front end looks massive in the Payne illustrations. You can see it's been tweaked to make it look his buffer beam and where it drops down at the frames has been made more in proportion by Dolby.
And there was also areas of like track engineering as well. Like I think I've seen one illustration where I think it was probably from either Thomas and Gordon or Thomas's train, where you actually see Thomas heading towards the signal gantry, and on the right hand side you see a set of points. In the way in the original illustrations, there's no way those points could work, if you know what I mean, because the way they're designed. But then when Dolby went over them again, when redid them, they kind of look more like how railway points should look like.
Yeah, there's an illustration. I think it's in Thomas. What's the is it Thomas and the Trucks? Yeah,
you're talking about the same illustration.
Oh, yeah, about it's the one where Dolby edits it, so you've got a load of sidings. Whereas in the original, you have these lines that just go. There's like crossover after crossover after crossover.
Like Newcastle.
Yeah. It's like Newcastle Central. But yeah, I think. Sorry, Mike, go on.
No, sorry. But I was just going to say, coming back to Thomas Comes Breakfast again, that there was also in the rewritten version where Klaus Spung illustrated. There was an additional story that I think Reverend Audrey put in. I think it was more or less talk about, like, what type of engine is Thomas, or like when Thomas gets his new buff being put on. There's a saying he made Thomas say, like, oh, I've got all these new parts taken, my old parts taken away, and new parts put on. I don't think I'll be myself or a new engine or a completely different engine.
I did forget. I
have it to hand here, and yes,
Yeah.
it's the illustration where you actually see him in the works.
In Craven's Gate, I forgot that was added. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. And it says Thomas didn't enjoy his time at the works. It's nice to feel mended again, he said afterwards. But they took so many of my old parts away and put new ones in that I'm not sure whether I'm really me or another engine.
That kind of makes me think, like, would that tie in similar to Henry's design, like Henry's redesign? Because, like, people often question, like, is it a redesigned engine? But that
we've had the conversation. A lot of people feel like, because it's quite a big rebuild, it's now two different engines.
Can I, Luke? Can I, please?
Yeah.
Can I destroy them? Can I? I mean, okay. So, I think a lot of people take it very literally, and they say, "Oh, Henry went to crew and they fixed him up." It's the same character, but it doesn't necessarily mean he's the same engine. In the context of the stories, it's Henry. In the context of, let's say, the real world, it's technically a different engine. Probably, maybe reusing a couple of bits. A bit like how a lot of the Clawtons were rebuilt into Patriots by the LMS. But in reality, they used, the wheels and maybe some of the motion?
Yeah, and that's all that was reused, but they were still rebuilds, and on the books they were the same locos.
Because back then it was cheaper to go, yes, then that, the board of directors would say, no, don't build new engines. They'd go, it looked better if you said we rebuilt something instead of saying, actually, we built something new. And
yeah, so for all intensive purposes, Henry is the same Henry, but the majority of the engine is new.
Yeah,
but it's still Henry.
Absolutely. And I've seen some fan conjecture where they say, "Oh, it's all the original metalwork was used." No, it wouldn't have been. It wouldn't have been.
Like Stuart says, you might reuse like a few things.
Wheel centers, maybe the wheel centers.
Yeah.
If old Henry 1 had the same size wheels as a Black 5, which I think are 6 foot wheels, you could maybe argue that he's got the same wheels, or there might have been. He might have the same whistle.
There we go. It's the whistle.
It's all in the whistle.
Yeah, Henry doesn't go. He goes. Heh.
But yeah, so like I say, Henry is the same Henry, but very, very rebuilt.
Yeah, and so I think you can say probably similar, Mike, as you're saying with Thomas there. There's probably it's a nice little reference to obviously locomotives going through works, and they have quite a big overhauls and changes, and boilers often and things. Things do have to be changed.
Yeah.
I always think it's one of those where you just think, don't overthink it, just enjoy it.
Yeah. 100%.
I think it's very easy to overthink it. I know a lot of people are very invested in why the engines can talk, and at the end of the day, dare I say it, but let it be a mystery.
Yeah, doesn't matter. It's just
who cares? They're great stories.
Part of that universe. Yeah, it's just a normal thing in that universe. Why question it? It's like questioning, why do we have intelligence? Well,
you don't.
I know. I was about to say not a lot.
Why do we have intelligence?
Luke, you opened that. I thought straight away.
Yeah. Anyway,
let's carry on our journey through Sodor. Luke, I think you wanted to touch on one of the Scarlowy books that is a big favourite of yours.
Yeah.
Actually, is it all right if I just mention Gallant Old Engine? Because that Gallant Old Engine.
Of course, yeah.
I really do enjoy Gallant. It was the second of the Scarlowy books that I received. I've mentioned on a previous Awdry Corner that my dad, I was like, Dad, how do you pronounce that engine's name? And he was like, Rhenius. And of course, it's not. It's Rheneas.
No, it's Renius.
Or Rheneas, as our friend, the dear Willie Rushton would say. Yeah, Gallant Old Engine was a favourite of mine. I think it's because we'd heard of this other character, Rheneas, but not really. He's only seen being, shunted away by Sir Handel in Four Little Engines off to go to the works. And I think it's that last story where, it's, of course, it is essentially the retelling of Dolgok on the Talaclin, but it's one of my favourites. And he got them home. What was it? The line, something that said, it's not the right station. And he said, doesn't matter, the passengers understand. And he got them home on one cylinder.
No, it's a very good story. It's a nice, kind of light shone on the very dark years of the Scarlowy, where they were constantly running at a loss and were always at threat of closing.
Yeah.
I grew up with that. Not so much with the book, but I used to go to the library and they had a cassette, and I'd go out to work with my dad when I was very young, about yay high, about 2 centimeters off the floor. And that's what I'd listen to on repeat, and somehow he didn't mind. And so I've quite a fondness for that book. But the book that Luke's about to talk about is my favourite book ever.
Well, we'll talk about it together if you want. And it is, of course, very, very old engines.
Oh, I thought it was going to be Jock the New Engine.
Right, go away.
Yeah,
you're banned.
You're banned from your own show now, Tom. No, very old engines is so good. There's just so much to be loved about it. One, it's definitely some of Peter Edwards' best work illustration-wise. I think there's and just kind of again shining a light on Sodor pre the Northwestern Railway, which is this is one of the only times, apart from in Duke the Lost Engine, that you do see before the Northwestern, but it's the only one that you see standard gauge before Northwestern as well. So it's got a lot of interest in there already, but just the stories are brilliant as well, and just the way Scarlowy and Rheneas are characterized, because you can tell that they are both a lot younger than they are in the other books, because they're written in such a different way but still kind of recognizable as them.
It's interesting you mentioned about some of Peter Edwards' finest work. I think it's interesting that I feel Very Old Engine is where he gets into his style of art. I often think that Stepney and Mountain Engines are both very good. I love his illustrations. They're a nice transition from from John T. Kenny. There's something a little bit of John T. Kenny still in some of it, and I think Very Old Engines, he gets into his sort of own stride with it, and it's this is his style.
I mean,
the one illustration I actually do like in Very Old Engines is the second illustration from Crosspatch, where we see Scarlowy and Talaclin getting their final checkovers before being sent over. And there's something about that illustration I just really like, because you get that very nice sense of the size of the building that they're in. You can see there's a bit of compression of space, or of limited space not there. But it's also nice to see the amount of detail as well. You see all the engine pipe work and all there. I quite like it, and of course you have the nice little detail of the workman hand painting Talaclin's name on. I thought that's actually quite a nice wee bit of detail I quite like.
Now, I don't mean to. Well, I'm sure it won't spoil it for you, Mike. But did you know there's a big error in that? And Luke knows what this is now.
Yeah.
This is now because of things.
To be fair, when the book was written and illustrated, it wasn't an error, because it's
not until recently,
2015. Or that's when it kind of became public knowledge that when built, Talachlin was red, along with Dolgok. Originally, they were believed to be green. When built. It should be a different shade of red to Scarlo. It's the red that it's been running in for the past 5 years.
Indian red, isn't it?
Indian red, yeah, because they used Fletcher Jennings works, where the other railways wouldn't, pay to have them painted in a certain shade. They put them in the Furness Railway red because they got the excess paint from the Furness Railway, which was Indian red. And if you do look in the back of that illustration, you can see Fletcher Jennings, Whitehaven along the side of the building outside the other thing there, which is where they were both built in Cumbria.
It's a very disappointing place, Whitehaven.
I know, we went through on a train once. Can
I just apologise for any of our viewers that are from Whitehaven?
Can I retract that apology?
In fairness, we used to have holidays in the Northern Lakes in lovely Ennerdale.
Here we go.
And some of my best friends are from Whitehaven. No.
Some of my best friends are from rubbish places.
But I did buy, there was a bookshop in Whitehaven, and I did pick up some RWS titles. I seem to think I got Troublesome Engines from there. It's just funny books. I often have a sort of my memory of a book, one of the Railway Series books. I often remember where I bought it. Like I remember I got Gordon the High Speed Engine from Lakeside and Haverthwaite Railway.
Nice.
Just going back to very old engines for a bit, and sort of back to the illustrations. My favourite from the book is from Crosspatch. I mean, there's one from Buck and Bronco that comes very close second place, but it's the illustration in which Scarlo is scowling at Mr. Mac, and the poor man on Scarlo's footplate is just. There we go.
Yeah,
that man.
Look at him.
There's a cat there somewhere, which there we go. He's watching everything go on.
Luke, can you because the camera will flick to whoever's speaking. So Luke, if you
so if you look here, you've got your cat just observing, and the man drenched in the smoke. And I just love the bricklayer is also in shot.
I love the guy. I love the one illustration where you have the guy in the pink, the violet waistcoat. He looks like he's roaring in laughter at all this. He literally thinks it's the most hilarious thing that he's ever seen in his life. Like, oh, you poor sod! You couldn't get that thing working.
I do love the look on Scarlo's face of properly like, well, I'm not doing anything.
Oh, I love. Just also want to put this out there. I also love that little bit of detail there where you can actually just see the eyes of
the fireman.
It's brilliant. I love it.
Bit of a cartoon thing.
It's that thing you do see in a lot of the later stuff with Edwards as well. He does like faces as well. He likes they like doing a lot of funny faces.
But the thing that I'd forgotten when revisiting the books is that they are so funny.
Yeah,
Mr. Mac is one of my favourite characters because he's so inept. He walks up to Scarlo and says, "We're going to," checks his book, "steam you up." Whatever that means.
Which illustration is it where the book's on the floor and it says how to drive?
It's
Engines for Dummies.
Yeah, it's like How Engines Work Volume 1. And it's down on the floor.
They're putting the tarpaulin over Scarlo. Have you got the picture there?
Yeah, see here. So you've got the illustration there, and just if you turn it upside down and read it, it does actually say How Engines Work Vol 1. Yeah, no, I think my favourite story within Very Old Engines, though, is probably Buck and Bronco.
Good man.
Yeah, no, there's just a lot to like in it, because you've got, again, the kind of like comeuppance of Scarlo being this eager, like full of this very young, eager loco, and obviously Rheneas is like, stop doing it, stop it. And then obviously you've got Mr. Mac just...
Yeah, that's my second favourite one. I love it. It's such a good book.
There's one illustration in that story actually that just sprung my memory. It's the third illustration where Scarlo is taking the coaches out of the shed. The house that's behind her, if you look at it there's actually a house not that far, just down the road from where I am. It actually has that same architecture.
Well, that's Mr. Mac's house.
Yeah.
Is that still supposedly there by the 1960s, or is it gone?
No.
Mr. Mac's dead by then.
It became the
He's
manager's house,
gone in
and
the
I
house Whitworth.
believe I think it's in the 30s when they demolished it because they couldn't, keep up the maintenance and stuff, and it was just
haunted.
expense for the company and stuff. So and it was like, no, the manager needs to go and rent his own house.
I must admit, I do particularly like how the last story rounds it all off to the modern day, and
Oh, you would.
but
I don't like the last one. It's all smelly and present day.
yeah, I like the 60s, but I like how I just like how it rounds everything off. The one issue I feel that Awdry tried to be clever and it doesn't quite work. There's the whole thing about dukes, and at a glance you think, when you then read book 25, you think, this is all because of Peter Sam was thinking it was Duke, as in the engine.
Yeah.
But I think it was like Awdry trying to retcon it, and it doesn't quite work because, of course, at the end of the story, Peter Sam says to the Duke, "Are you real?" So I think really Peter Sam's getting worked up because he thinks, oh, the Duke's not going to come because he's scrapped. But Awdry then tries to work it later on in 25 that actually Peter Sam was thinking it was Duke, the lost engine.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I do think that was always his intention. I do think he'd already planned out the Mid-Sodor and had Duke as a thing, and that's what the whole conversation is about, because they've all been scrapped, and obviously Peter Sam's horrified by that because he's like, what? No, Duke scrapped? Like, because this is 5 years before Duke first appears. I'm pretty sure. No, 4 years.
See, the thing is it does read like he's talking about the man as opposed to
it does
the engine.
Peter Sam could bear it no longer. "Excuse me, Sir Duke," he burst out. "Are you real?" There was a shocked silence. The Duke smiled. "Scarlo," he said, "you've been listening to Duck. Duck thinks Dukes were Great Western engines." And it sort of resolves it, that actually if you took that bit out, it would then link better into...
I do think it's more kind of like Peter Sam's like, it is a bit of a retcon with Duke.
Yeah.
But also I think it is kind of meant to be hinting, because I feel like he did have that all kind of plan that the Mid-Sodor was a thing. Because when did he do his layout and his model of the Mid-Sodor?
Mid-Sodor was made during the 60s.
Exactly.
Because it was before he made it there before he started work on making Firecore Mark II. Because I know, because having looked at whatever pictures I could find of the layout, because I think Christopher Awdry now owns the layout. There is some items from Firecore Mark I that's incorporated into it. They're like Hackenbeck Halt is now is it Casnahowen or Costa Crew? I can't remember what the name of the station is, but it's one of the stations on Mid-Sodor.
Casnahowen, or is there two stations on that layout? Is it Casnahowen and Ulfstead Road?
Yes. Yeah, so Casnahowen is basically Hackenbeck Halt station. Then Ulstead is just a new building altogether. But I think Peter and Governor, one of the illustrators actually made a building for the Mid-Sodor Railway, if I remember reading in the Thomas the Tank Engine Man, and Reverend Awdry said, if that building now added on to it, that's actually now makes it the Mark II version of that layout. So that kind of got me a bit confused. It sounded like was there really much change to the Mid-Sodor just by actually adding another building, just to say this is the Mark II version?
Yeah, but it does beg the question that obviously, if he was making that layout in the 60s, he already had the Mid-Sodor planned as a concept and the locos long before he wrote Duke the Lost Engine. So that's kind of why I think in Very Old Engine, it's kind of implying Peter Sam's thinking about Duke. But at the end then, when it's a guy, he's like, oh, it's not the Duke I was thinking of, but Duck said they were all scrapped still. Why are you here? He's just a bit dumb.
Now, you mentioned the Thomas Tank Engine Man book. I've started reading that recently, and it's very good, isn't it?
Yes.
I need to get onto it.
One thing I was absolutely shocked to see, as someone who is a huge fan of the railway, is that in his youth, the Reverend W. Awdry and George Awdry used to visit the Western Clevedon and Portishead Light Railway.
Yeah.
And there was an article in the Colonel Stevens Society. Colonel Stevens was a chap who ran a lot of light railways in Britain, by the way, one of which was the Western Cleveland Portishead. And there was an article saying, is Colonel Stevens the Fat Controller? Because they point out that, the Reverend Awdry used to live near the Selsey tram. And indeed, all the engines there were painted blue, red lining, and everything was sort of very quaint. And it's sort of interesting when you compare the Colonel's railways and the North Western. And
can I just bring up a point as well, Stuart?
yeah,
Charles Hatt is a colonel.
And there we have it. Well, thank you for joining us this week.
In the iOS, in Island of Sodor, Awdry writes that Charles Hatt served and got to the rank of colonel before coming back to Sodor and taking on the position as his father's assistant, and then taking over a couple of years later, and such. So,
did he do it? Did he do it? Was he like CME of Crovan's Gate before he became?
Yeah. He was the CME of Crovan's Gate and his father's assistant. I think it was about 2 or 3 years before Topham Hatt retired. But it is an interesting thing, though, what you're saying about it is Colonel Stevens one of the bases for, the Hatt family. Definitely, if Charles is a colonel, it's a decent little theory.
Is there? I'm just kind of wondering now. Here, is there any pictures of Colonel Stevens?
Yes, I'll get one for the benefit of the chat. Tom will, however, have to insert a crudely drawn illustration due to copyright issues.
Well, actually, Luke's more technical. I said Luke's more technical savvy. Luke, can't you get one and do screen share?
Yeah, give me a second.
Yeah, hold on. I've got a good one of him somewhere.
and then
I'll try and not get the funny one.
All our lovely viewers can see it as well. Just to say, Mike, you've answered a question for me there, because I know that the Mid-Sodor layout had been at the Cadeby, at Teddy Boston's place for a long time.
Yes.
And I wondered when Cadeby closed in, I think, 2005, I wondered where it had gone. And
yeah, because when I met Christopher Awdry in 2008 at Peakarama in Devon, I said to him, like, was there any model railway items from your father's collection that you kept that the Tyler Clinton Railway hasn't got? And he says, well, I do have the Mid-Sodor Railway. And I says, well, that's pretty cool. I says, that's pretty good. And I says, do you still run? And he says, not necessarily run. I just had it as a bit of like a display thing, really. But it'd be nice to maybe someday. But
You chaps see the share screen there? There he is.
all right.
So yeah, very potentially, if you get rid of the
I
mustache.
think he's a dead ringer for Fergus Duncan.
Actually, yeah.
actually,
For some reason, I'm actually starting to get images of Thompson from the Tintin comics.
Yeah, he definitely has the aesthetic, isn't he?
there's a bit of, I almost said there's a bit of thin controller there with the bowler hat.
Yeah, actually, yeah.
I think that's him actually on the WCMP. Funnily enough, perhaps roughly the same time that Wilbert and George used to visit it.
Do you think, is it possible you can get maybe a shot of maybe one of the engines on the railway with that livery, just so we maybe could show that as a comparison?
Yes. The only engine on that railway that would have had it was one on loan from the Kent and East Sussex.
Okay.
Which was a locomotive called Northium, which was actually an Mr. Porter as Gladstone.
Oh, right. I don't know, because I didn't know that engine had a specific livery. I thought it was just probably in black or grey or whatever.
No, it was blue with red lining.
Never knew that.
Darker
Someone's
blue.
actually done a really good colorization of a photo. But so of course there is the issue of copyright. I don't want to be. Then again, this is shared by the actual railway, so I'm sure it's fine, right?
It should be all right.
It's a very good colorization. I'll send it over to you, Luke. Sadly, there's not a lot of colour photo. In fact, I don't think there are any colour photos. All there is evidence of bodium on the Cantonese Sussex is, well, I don't think it is anymore, but at one point it was painted in the sort of dark Prussian blue. It's not the same. It's yeah, the blue's a lot darker.
That's very Great Eastern, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it is that blue and red lining. So you never know.
That's a very nice colorization, that.
It is, definitely.
I'll try and find a picture of... here we go. I think this is also from the Cantonese Sussex. So it looks... I'd say it's a Prussian blue. When I've been building, my stuff, I've gone for Caledonian Royal Blue, which is a very dark sort of navy.
Yeah.
It does look pretty sort of black. But yeah,
it kind of looks very purple in my case, but then maybe
Yeah,
that's
I
just because of the way the light and all shooting on it.
it can look completely different depending on the lighting. In the older photographs, it's sort of impossible to tell. But yeah, that was a livery that a lot of Colonel Stevens locos wore. They wore that livery on the Stelzey tram, not with the fancy Cantonese Sussex thing there. It was just, lined blue or just plain blue in some cases.
Oh, okay.
No, it's an interesting thing because that could have been one of the inspirations for, the livery.
Yeah, because when you look at Reverend Awdry's model of Edward now, yes, this is probably like just due to the age now of the model. But when you look at one at the paintwork on it, there is actually quite a dark blue on it now. But again, that's probably just maybe the layer of varnish that's on it now that's now aged, which is toned down the color. But it kind of does bring up that livery in a way.
I have realised that there is a quite big error actually with that colorized photo of Northium, and that's the dome was brass.
Oh.
Yeah, but oh well, still nice colorization. But yes, I think also just to wrap this little section up, I think it was in also Thomas Tank Engine Man, where Awdry says or said rather, if this Taliclin thing is anything like the WCMP, then I think it was something along those lines, where he was hoping that it would be of that ilk, and where he probably found that it was much more professional. Because on the WCMP, sorry, I'm just going to waste everyone's time here. They really did things badly. They really did. Because, for example, Colonel Stevens was a huge innovator. He believed that steam traction was a thing of the past. So he brought in petrol rail cars, and he bought a Drury rail car, second-hand from the Southern, and for many years it putted along the line, doing a lot of good. The thing is that it had a problematic radiator. Now, a lot of railways would fix that. What they did on the WCMP was the guard would they'd stop the train, the guard would step out, go into the nearest farmer's field with a bucket, and come back with some cow poo and pour it in the radiator, and that'd fix it. So there you go. The Colonel Stevens Railways.
The only railway ran on cow dung.
Well,
moving on.
Yes.
I thought that we should end on a high note for that section.
Why, thank you, Stuart. One story that did come up several times actually when we tweeted about what was people's favourite stories, was one of my favourite from Enterprise and Engine, which is Super Rescue. Now, there was one comment online about how there is an error in the book regarding Henry, because his regulator is jammed open, but all of a sudden he can change direction. But that is not an error, is it, Luke?
Nah. So I've seen it in the past as well. People going, Henry's failed, and it said his regulator's jammed. But how can he still rescue the train? How can he stop? How can he move forward and backwards if it's broken? The difference is the regulator is literally just the go stick. Like that doesn't determine direction or you're stopping. If it's open, you've got steam traveling through the valves. And obviously, you don't want to have it open when you're stopped, but in theory you can, because your reverser, which is what determines forward or backwards or mid gear, that tells you where you want to go. And the further you take it back, if you would, because like if you put your reverser in full forward, you're going to be using all of the steam that's going through the system. If you pull it back to a little bit, you're not going to be using as much steam, and you'll go slower. Like when you're in, if you're going slower, but you won't use as much. So that's what's being used in the story. Henry's regulator is jammed open and steam's constantly going through, but because the driver's using the reverser, Henry can still go forward and backwards, and if you put it in mid gear, you can stop.
But I suppose for those that drive, I suppose it's like, imagine your throttle is jammed to some extent. The accelerator is jammed, but you can control your clutch and your gears still.
And your brake, yeah.
Brake. So that's the sort of way to describe it. And
it's not healthy, and it'll rev, but you can still change your gears, you can still go in reverse, you can still brake.
Because your reverser is essentially, so steam locomotives don't have gears. The reverser works by, I think you said, when you put it into full forward, when you start a train, you have it in full forward because you're using the maximum length of the cylinder with for steam, because that's when you're starting. And as you go faster and faster, you will notch it back because you're having to use as much steam because you're going at speed.
And you've got momentum. But if you're going slow, using less steam means you're just going to end up going slower.
Yeah.
And it won't be as powerful. But it's just one of those things. It's not a plot hole. It's actually, correct. But for someone who might not know how the reverser and the regulator work together and such, might just assume, oh, well, he can't stop because his regulator's open. That's not the case.
And
it's a very good story overall, though. I really love Super Rescue.
It is, and I think I like it, and I'm really pleased it's got so much reference on Twitter, because it's not an action story. It's a railway story. It's quite technical. You can tell it wouldn't work if it was one of the early stories. It works for the time period, and it's one of my favourites because it's a proper explaining how locomotives work. And of course, don't work, yeah. And of course, it is based on a real story. We don't actually know what it's based on in particular, but it's in the foreword that somebody called a young person called Richard had written to the Reverend Awdry, and he'd seen it at Waterloo?
I think that sounds right. And he'd sent some pictures as well, I believe. But yeah, I think one other thing that I really do love about Super Rescue is all that, but also the fact it's very much kind of like almost a culmination of kind of like Henry as a character, because he's gone from this very weak, oh, woe is me, I'm failed character to I'm failed and I'm rescuing two other failed locos, and I'm smug about it, if you know what I mean. He's a lot more confident kind of in himself and what he can do, and it's a very nice kind of like rounding off of Henry, because you do see at the start of the story he is a bit moany about being failed like he used to be, but by the end of it he's like, nah, just because I'm failed doesn't mean I can't be good. And it's very nice, that little touching scene between him and Burr.
And it's also a redemption scene within the book, because in the previous story, he's been so arrogant about tenders, and he's had his comeuppance by the whole, with carrying the sludge train.
Yeah, it's a very nice character piece for Henry.
How many tenders do you have? And we can have them.
That was a little bit of Stuart's rendition of. Were we Willie Rushton at this point?
Yes, it was Willie Rushton. You see, of course, when we worked on the Bluebell, we had Cranfield and Crumford. They were scrapped in 1947. Pity, really.
Right, Stuart.
Oh, is it me? My time. Good. Right. So, this is, a general sort of thing. but you know, words are escaping me.
Tramway
I'm
engines.
tramway engines. Now, I have seen over the internet that some people don't quite like Tony the Tram or Toby the Tram.
I was wondering who Tony was.
There's Tony and Tommy and Toby.
All his brothers.
One of those ones. They both answered the same name.
In fact, someone said to me that someone said, not naming names, that Toby was sort of not really that good, and I thought that's horrible.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's a horrible thing to say. So, you know, and they were saying that he was sort of useless within the Farquhar trio, and I think that's just rubbish, because let's just go back to Toby's beginnings. He works on a branch line, right? Not quite Wisbech. So no one travels on his railway. You know, nobody talks to him. He's a very lonely soul. And then, you know, the railway closes and everyone's like, "Oh, we're going to miss you, Toby." And he's like, "Yeah, well, maybe if you actually showed up and travelled on the railway, you wouldn't have to miss me." So, you know, he's basically been tossed in the bin and everyone's like, "Oh, you know, thoughts and prayers." But then he gets second chance. Oh, it's great. And then he ends up on this branch line with an idiot. And he's like, well, you know, it's better than nothing. And then another idiot shows up. In fact, Michael is... Oh,
yep.
you say something...
Yeah, this. It started off with this little idiot first. And then the other one came along.
Yeah, then the other one comes along. And what Toby sees is the fact that people are under this weird misconception that Thomas and Percy are best friends, when what they are is that they're best enemies. They're rivals.
Can I just pop? There we are. Here he is.
That's the other two.
Hang on, might as well get my ones first. Oh.
One idiot and one noble engine.
Now, it's amusing because of Thomas and Percy spend the entirety of their lives trying to one-up each other. You get Thomas, who starts off as this cheeky little engine, and then Percy comes along and basically steals his act. So, oh, there we go.
Yeah, it's my work in progress, Toby and Percy. So
Lovely.
And you get, you know, Thomas sort of almost changes his character out of spite when Percy comes along and tries the cheeky stuff. You know, he goes, "Oh, silly little thing," and then Percy, you know, is just a cheeky little beggar. And so you get stuff like, for example, in tramway engines, as the best examples of this, Ghost Train. You know, Percy crashes into a cart of lime, and you know, it's like, "Oh, Toby, do you want to play a joke?" And Toby, you know, will say yes, because he'll take any opportunity to have a laugh. Because do you know what? Thomas doesn't have a go at Toby. He has a go at Percy for tricking him. Toby's laughing in the background. He's having a great time, and he doesn't suffer the consequences. You get Willie Bear, and Toby switches sides, you know, to laugh at Percy. He's a manipulator. He's a poo stirrer. We like to say poo.
Yeah, you may say that word.
Can I say the ruder word?
No.
Oh.
Yeah, I thought so. And then the beauty of it is you come to Mavis.
And isn't this the beauty, Stuart, of the Awdry story? Because Awdry has written it like this on purpose.
And what happens is that Toby, who has been sitting on the fence, playing both sides for this entire time, for years, meets his match. And we see the true side of Toby. Toby is a bitch.
Oh, no.
And just for anybody who can I just show the image? Show the image. For anyone, you know, this is summed up so well. There's Mavis. Look at her. Look at Toby. Look at Toby there.
He hates it.
Look at the eyes. We've never seen him so angry. He hates her.
You know, because suddenly he's getting involved in things. He's getting dragged in because of this thing is doing his work, and
well, no, she's not really doing his work. It's just like an extra bit of help, but she's like so incompetent.
Well, before she came along, Toby was the one who shunted at the quarry, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah, he did all the quarry trains and so forth, but then he can't be at the quarry all the time whilst he's doing trains because of probably maybe the more order of stone that's coming in. Toby's not there to do, so that's why.
And it's obviously it's changing up his routine, changing up his shunting.
Yeah, and I think he hates it.
Yeah,
because he's like, I like being isolated. He likes to have time away from the idiots, and suddenly there's another idiot in the ring, and this isn't an idiot that he can, you know, sort of play against. And there's a couple of great illustrations which you know, along with the story, just it's beautiful. You know,
just had a thought actually now about this is I kind of see Toby as like, you know, he's the eldest out of the lot, out of everyone on the Farquhar branch out there, but I kind of think of it as a series of siblings. So Thomas and Percy are acting as like Toby's siblings, like brothers, like two extra pair of brothers that are just constantly bickering and fighting at each other on certain things. And he's the eldest one, and he's the one that has to sort them out and be like, you know, the boss between them, like represent the elders and so forth. But then Mavis in some terms, and it's going to sound very silly in a way, but it kind of, I kind of think like Mavis could probably be like, as if Toby is like, he's acting as Toby's maybe so-called, I wouldn't say girlfriend, but
you heard it here first.
All right, I don't know, but like one of those annoying friends that comes in and just sort of like, you know,
devil's
changes his
advocate
life around. Like it said, for example, like it says about where she loves rearranging things and puts Toby's trucks in different places every day. This kind of, you know, it kind of annoys when Toby likes his things like to be in a certain place at a certain time.
He's doing it on purpose.
Like, no, you've done this. You've ruined it. You've ruined my whole schedule. My what do you call it? My arrangement. It shouldn't be done like this.
But what I really love is that, you know, he's portrayed for a lot of it as this sort of stoic, you know, intelligent, wise old engine, and then as soon as like the shoe is on the other foot, he's as bad as Thomas and Percy. You know, like, I'm not going to go and help her. Oh, but you know, you got to help her.
The funniest thing with that illustration in question of that story is the fact, if you look at the next illustration, the driver and fireman have said Mavis is in trouble, and Toby's probably just like, yeah, I know, I can see. It's only over there. It's like...
Yeah, and he still refuses to go.
It's beautiful. And
yeah, she can manage her trucks herself. Well, your trucks, really? I just love the way it's
just this thing of basically Thomas and Percy always at each other's throats, and Toby's just egging them on against each other. And
it's karma.
Yeah.
He gets his comeuppance at the final.
He loves the drama.
But then we kind of get like an equal mind really with the characters. So we have like, you know, the four characters portrayed in this book there. Without Daisy. Daisy's only just thrown in just for someone for Mavis to talk to. But there's kind of like a nice dividing between like, you know, who's up against who. So like in the first two stories it's Thomas and Percy, but then in the next two it's Toby and Mavis.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just something to Mike. You mentioned something there, and this is where I think this book follows on very much from Branchline. And actually, we talked about like a chronology, and actually, Tramways is set not far after Branchline. If you look at some,
yeah, because I'd say probably the events of, say, let me see now. I'm guessing Ghost Train is probably maybe. I'm just gonna have a guess. Really, I think it's probably maybe November time. I think because when you look around, you see all the trees. All the trees all have bare branches, so it's probably maybe sometime maybe during winter time.
But I do think if you look at the events in Branchline, Thomas was away.
Yeah.
Obviously, Percy was, you know, would I'm guessing, because we see this later in a Christopher Awdry book, Percy could have deputised with Annie and Clarabelle. If I know Daisy's brought in anyway, but I can imagine that Toby was having to deal with a lot of the standard freight on the Farquhar branch, and it's because he wasn't literally able to be in two places at once. This is why Mavis was brought in for the shunting to be done at the quarry.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes quite a lot of good sense, actually. One thing I also kind of noticed in Tramway Engines as well, which I just want to point out here, is when I was studying, like researching Farquhar branching, it was also in terms of like in the early days of my modeling, I was trying to figure out how far exactly the laneway crossing is from Farquhar sheds, and I think in the last illustration of the Mavis story,
You can
actually get an idea of distance really from the shed.
Yeah.
So I kind of think that the laneway is a bit further on behind the station master's house, and there's probably maybe two crossings.
Yeah, it's really not that far away.
Yeah,
Like a couple of streets down.
I think you could interpret it two ways. You could do it as being, from a model perspective, I'm thinking here, because obviously, actually, I'm going to probably need to do this with my Farquhar layout. I possibly, from space-wise, I may use the lane as a crossing where the station master's house is. I think in reality, I think it's not. I think it's possibly a second crossing. I'll see near the time, but I like the lane because it is it's a lovely feature.
Yeah, it's a nice wee setup really as well, and I mean, I've modelled it as well for my adoption there, and it is quite a nice wee model to make up really.
Yeah,
very nice indeed. So,
right,
Stuart, do you feel better now?
No, I don't think I did a very good job of that.
Well, you only get one chance.
Let Twitter and YouTube be the judge of your thesis.
I'm going to die.
I do realise we actually haven't touched on any Christopher Awdry books. Maybe that could be something we talk about at a later date at some point.
Possibly, yeah.
Tramway Engines was the last book, Tom.
Ooh.
Another video subject.
Another video, I think, for that one. So, well, thank you very much, gentlemen. Once again, it's been a lovely way to, spend these days of isolation. So, yeah, I'd just like to thank Luke, thank Stuart, and thank again our special guest, Mike. Stay safe, everyone, and we'll catch up with you soon.
All right.
Bye-bye.